Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was chosen as the guardian of the Phantom Zone. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world was a symphony of chaos, and Izuku Midoriya was a silent, paralyzed note in the cacophony. Heat, acrid and suffocating, radiated in waves from the explosions, charring the air with the smell of burnt sugar and raw sewage. It was the scent of Kaken's Quirk, nitroglycerin sweat, twisted into something monstrous by the suffocating embrace of the sludge villain. The crowd, a wall of gaping mouths and glowing phone screens, roared with a mixture of terror and morbid fascination. Pro-heroes were on the scene. Death Arms, with his powerful physique, was useless against a fluid enemy. Kamui Woods was occupied with civilian rescue, his wooden limbs snatching people from the path of falling debris. The rookie, empty lady, couldn't fit down the narrow commercial alley. They were all there. They were all powerful. And they were all failing. Izuku's feet were glued to the pavement, his knuckles white where he clutched the strap of his yellow backpack. Inside, his burnt notebook, Hero Analysis for the Future, No. 13, felt like a block of lead, a testament to a dream that had been declared dead only an hour ago. Without a quirk, All Might's voice echoed in his mind, not booming and heroic, but weary and pragmatic. The voice of a man delivering a terminal diagnosis. It's not bad to dream. But you also have to be realistic, kid. And now, here was the proof, playing out in horrifying, vivid detail. Bakugo, Kaken, was trapped. The villain was a churning, viscous mass of green-brown sludge, its two large, manic eyes rolling in their sockets. It was trying to possess Kaken's body, using his explosive quirk to lash out indiscriminately, keeping the heroes at bay. But what chilled Izuku to the bone, what broke through his paralysis, was the look in Kaken's eyes. For the first time in his life, Izuku didn't see the arrogant pride, the casual cruelty, or the burning ambition. He saw sheer, undiluted terror. Kaken was suffocating. He was fighting, thrashing, but his eyes were wide, pleading. They screamed a single, desperate message, "Help me," and no one could. Izuku's blood ran cold. This is my fault. The thought was a shard of ice in his gut. He was the one who had clung to All Might's leg, distracting him, using up his time. If he hadn't been so selfish, so desperate for a scrap of validation, All Might would have already captured this villain. Kaken wouldn't be dying. The world seemed to slow, the roar of the crowd fading into a dull drone. He saw the heroes' strained faces. He saw the fire. He saw Kaken's mouth open in a silent, desperate gasp for air that would never come. And then, his legs moved. It wasn't a decision. It was an instinct, a primal, undeniable impulse that overrode every rational thought, every fear, every single warning bell screaming in his skull. His feet slapped against the asphalt, a frantic, clumsy rhythm. He heard someone shout, "Hey! Kid! Stop!" But the voice was distant, irrelevant. All that mattered was the look in Kaken's eyes. "What the hell is that brat doing?" Death Arms roared. Izuku didn't have a plan. He had a backpack. He swung it off his shoulders, his thin arms straining, and hurled it with all his might. The yellow bag sailed through the air and struck the villain squarely in one of its massive eyes. It was a pathetic, useless gesture. But it worked. The villain flinched, its grip loosening for a fraction of a second. Arg! My eye! It was enough. A sliver of an opening. Kaken's mouth was free, and he sucked in a ragged, desperate breath of air. "Kaken!" Izuku screamed, his voice raw. He was clawing at the sludge now, his fingers sinking into the thick, foul-smelling substance. It was like trying to dig someone out of a mudslide with his bare hands. Hopeless. Useless. "Deku?" Bakugo choked out, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and fury. "What the hell are you doing here? Get away! I couldn't just stand there and watch you die!" Izuku sobbed, his tears mixing with the grime on his face. You looked like you were asking for help." That single, honest admission seemed to shatter something in Bakugo. For a moment, the fight seemed to leave him. But the villain recovered its composure, its form swelling around them. "A meat shield with a fiery quirk, and a bonus snack," it gurgled, a slimy tendril rising up like a cobra, poised to strike Izuku down. "You've made a fatal mistake, kid!" Izuku saw it coming. He closed his eyes, bracing for the impact that would surely end his short, pointless life. In the distance, he saw a blur of red, white, and blue. All Might. He was about to intervene. He was almost there. And then, the world ended, not with a bang, or a flash of light, but with a profound and absolute cessation. The sound vanished first. The crackle of flames, the gurgle of the villain, Bakugo's ragged breathing, the distant roar of the crowd, all of it was snuffed out, as if a cosmic finger had been pressed to the lips of the universe. The silence was so total it was a physical pressure against his eardrums. Then, motion ceased. A lick of flame, reaching for a storefront awning, froze into a perfect, crystalline sculpture of fire. A bead of sweat on Bakugo's temple hung suspended in the air. The villain's descending tendril stopped, inches from Izuku's face, its semi-liquid form holding an impossible solidity. And All Might, mid-lunge, was a magnificent, unmoving statue of heroic potential, his fist cocked back, a promise of salvation that would never land. The world had become a diorama, and Izuku was the only living thing in it. Panic, cold and sharp, seized him. What? A quirk? Did someone? He looked around wildly, but there was no one. Just the frozen tableau of disaster. Then, reality began to fray at the edges. It started in front of him, a shimmering distortion in the air, like heat haze over summer asphalt. But this wasn't heat. It warped light, bending the frozen scene around it. The air itself seemed to fold, to fracture. From this tear in the fabric of the moment, a presence bled through. It had no form, no body. It was a confluence of light and shadow, a ghost made of fractured starlight and ancient dust. It felt old. Impossibly old. As old as the silence it had brought with it. A voice bloomed inside Izuku's mind, not as sound, but as pure, unadulterated thought, layered with the weariness of a billion lifetimes. Child of dust. Izuku stumbled back, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against the stillness. What are you? I am the Guardian. And I am dying. The presence pulsed, and with it came a wave of feeling, not emotion, but a state of being. It was the feeling of a battery running out of power, of a star collapsing under its own weight, of a story reaching its final, inevitable word. For eons I have watched. I have waited. My charge is eternal, but I am not. A successor must be chosen. Successor? For what? Izuku's mind raced. Was this a hero? A god? A villain playing a trick? The non-corporeal entity seemed to focus on him, its formless gaze piercing through his skin, his bones, seeing the frantic, desperate, heroic soul cowering within. Across the skin of countless realities I searched. I sought power. I sought wisdom. I sought strength. I found them all, and in them, I found corruption. Pride. Ambition. The very seeds of the chaos I am sworn to contain. They were all unsuitable. Images flooded Izuku's mind unbidden. A being of pure energy, laughing as it consumed a sun. A king in golden armor, sitting on a throne of skulls. A scientist, merging with a machine, declaring itself the new god of its universe. These were the candidates. The strong ones. The powerful ones, so I changed my search. We do not seek the strong, for their strength will inevitably be turned to their own ends. We seek the incorruptible. We seek a will forged not in power, but in its absence. A spirit that, when faced with absolute hopelessness, with no strength, no ability, no chance of success, still chooses to act. To protect. To save. The presence seemed to loom closer, the frozen scene around them reflecting in its shimmering, paradoxical form. You, Izuku Midoriya. Quirkless. Powerless. You ran into the fire not because you thought you could win, but because you could not bear to watch another suffer. This is the quality we require, a heart so purely devoted to the preservation of others that it will sacrifice itself without a moment's hesitation. It is the only anchor strong enough to withstand eternity. Anchor? I don't understand. Izuku stammered, his mind reeling. I am the Warden of the Phantom Zone. The words resonated with a terrifying gravity. Izuku felt a phantom coldness seep into the frozen air. It is a dimension outside of time. A prison. A silent, gray infinity built from the bedrock of reality itself. Within it, we house the mistakes, the abominations, the beings too powerful, too malevolent, or simply too dangerous to be allowed to exist in the vibrant tapestry of the multiverse. Conquerors who enslaved galaxies, reality warpers who treated physics as a suggestion, creatures who fed on the very concept of hope. They are all there. Silent. Contained. Another flash of imagery, far more horrifying this time. A stoic man in black armor, his eyes burning with cold fury, standing on a planet of corpses, a swirling vortex of impossible colors that whispered promises of madness. A hulking, gray-skinned monster whose every footstep shattered the ground beneath it. This prison is not a simple cage of steel and stone. It is a cage of concepts, maintained by a sentient will. A guardian. Without a warden to reinforce its walls, to feel its weaknesses, to actively will it to hold, it would crumble. The prisoners would be unleashed. Not upon one world, but upon all. The weight of the explanation settled on Izuku like a physical thing. He wasn't just talking about villains. He was talking about extinction-level events, beings that would make All for One look like a common street thug. Why me? He whispered, the question feeling small and foolish. Because the power of the Guardian is drawn from the zone itself. It is vast. It is the power to bend space, to create matter from nothingness, to step between moments. In the hands of someone with ambition, it would be the ultimate weapon. In your hands, it will be the ultimate shield. But this power comes with a price. A terrible, silent price. The entity's thought voice grew somber, heavy with the burden it was about to offer. To be the Guardian is to be eternally vigilant. You will feel the prisoners. You will hear their silent screams, their endless whispers of hatred and madness, at the edge of your every thought. It will be a constant hum in the back of your soul. You will be tied to the zone, and it will demand your focus, your energy, your very being. It is a life of profound, absolute isolation, a hero no one will ever see. A savior whose name will never be known. You will save billions, and they will never know they were in danger. This is the burden, an eternity of listening to the whispers of mad gods, alone in the dark. Izuku stared at the frozen form of Kaken, still trapped, still dying. He thought of his mother, who he knew would be at home right now, probably starting to worry. He thought of his dream, of being a hero like All Might, smiling, saving people, and letting them know that everything was okay. This offer was the antithesis of that dream. It wasn't a life of bright smiles and televised victories. It was a life of silent suffering, of hidden battles, of a loneliness so complete it was hard to even comprehend. But it was a chance to save people. Not just one or two, not just a city. Everyone. Everywhere. It was the most heroic task imaginable. He wouldn't be a hero. He would be the hero, the foundation upon which all other heroism was built. The silent wall that held back the flood. Zod's promise of utopia versus the chaotic freedom of humanity was a battle of ideology. This was a choice Izuku had to make within himself, a temptation that spoke directly to his deepest desire, to save everyone. He thought of the villains, the strife, the pain he saw on the news every day. The idea of a perfect, ordered world was intoxicating. But then he thought of Kaken, of his explosive, chaotic, often cruel personality. He thought of Uraraka's bright, bubbly determination, Ida's rigid but well-meaning adherence to rules. Humanity wasn't perfect. It was messy. It was chaotic. And that was where the beauty was. Zod's peace was the peace of the grave. It wasn't life. He looked back at the dying Guardian, his boyish face set with a resolve that seemed far too old for his 14 years. I was told I could never be a hero without a quirk, Izuku said, his voice no longer trembling. You're offering me the power to save everyone. The price is that no one will know, and I'll be alone. He took a deep breath, the still, cold air not even filling his lungs. It didn't need to. A hero doesn't do it for the fame. They do it because it's the right thing to do. He met the entity's non-gaze, his green eyes shining with unshed tears and unbreakable determination. I accept. A wave of profound relief washed from the Guardian, a final, weary exhalation at the end of a long journey. Then it is done. The locus of power is yours. The burden is past. Forgive me. The last two words were not a thought, but a feeling, a sliver of genuine, cosmic pity. Then the universe poured into him. It was not a gentle transfer. It was a dam breaking. 1,000,000,000 years of knowledge, of duty, of pain, crashed into his mind. He felt the cold, gray expanse of the phantom zone, not as an image, but as a part of himself. He felt the prisoners, each one a pinprick of malevolent consciousness, the rage of the Kryptonian general, the gibbering hunger of the Star Eater, the cold, calculating logic of a hive mind that had conquered 1,000 worlds. They were a chorus of silent malice, and their hatred was a physical force. He learned the geometry of folded space, the physics of dimensional boundaries, the art of weaving nothingness into substance. The knowledge didn't settle in his brain, it was branded onto his soul. A searing pain erupted in his chest, directly over his heart. He gasped, clutching at his school uniform, and felt a strange, geometric pattern burn itself into his being, a metaphysical key, an anchor, his focus. It was the point through which he would channel the zone's immense, sterile power. The formless guardian began to dissolve, its light fading, its presence thinning into nothingness. Its final thought was a faint, distant echo, "Hold the line, Warden," and then it was gone. The pain in his chest subsided to a dull ache. The flood of knowledge receded, not vanishing, but settling deep within him, waiting to be accessed. The cacophony of the prisoner's thoughts quieted to a persistent, low-level hum at the very edge of his hearing, like the buzz of a distant power line. And just as suddenly as it had stopped, time resumed. Boom! The sound and the force of All Might's arrival were concussive. The world roared back to life. "I really am pathetic," the hero bellowed, his voice washing over Izuku. Blood streamed from a cut on the hero's brow. He grabbed Izuku and Bakugo, pulling them from the villain's grasp with impossible ease. Texas! Smash! The punch was a hurricane. The air pressure alone was enough to obliterate the sludge villain, splattering it across the alley walls. The clouds above parted, and a sudden downpour began, as if the sky itself was weeping with relief. Izuku lay on the wet pavement, gasping. The world felt different. Sharper. More fragile. He could feel the slight weakness in the spatial fabric caused by All Might's impossible strength, a faint tremor in the reality he was now sworn to protect. He looked at his idol, the symbol of peace, and felt a chasm open between them. All Might was a giant, but Izuku had just been shown a universe of titans. The aftermath was a blur. The pro-heroes scolded him for his recklessness. The paramedics checked him over. Bakugo was praised for his endurance and powerful quirk. The media swarmed. Through it all, Izuku was silent. He felt disconnected, as if watching a movie of his own life. The hum was still there. The silent, hateful chorus. He could feel the weight of 1,000,000 resentful stares on his back, from a place no one else could see. Later, as he walked home, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, the full reality of his new existence began to sink in. He was Izuku Midoriya, a middle school student, and he was the Warden of Infinity, the guardian of the Phantom Zone. The two identities warred within him. He could feel the zone, a constant presence tethered to the mark on his chest. It was a cold, empty place, and the thought of it made him shiver despite the warm evening air. He could feel its power, a deep, quiet well of potential thrumming beneath his skin. It felt alien, sterile, nothing like the vibrant, chaotic energy of the quirks he had studied his whole life. When he got home, his mother fussed over him, her eyes filled with worried tears as she watched the news report of the incident. He reassured her, telling her he was fine, that he had just been in the wrong place at the wrong time. The lie tasted like ash in his mouth. How could he ever tell her the truth? How could he explain the hum in his head or the sudden, crushing exhaustion that felt so deep? That night he stood in front of his bathroom mirror. He pulled up his shirt. At first, he saw nothing but his pale, thin chest. But as he focused, concentrating on the faint, cold feeling over his heart, it appeared. A faint, silvery pattern, visible only to him. It looked like a series of interlocking geometric shapes, like a celestial circuit diagram or a forgotten glyph. It pulsed with a soft, gray light, in time with his frantic heartbeat. His focus. The key. The brand. He let the shirt fall. He looked at his reflection, at the boy with the wild green hair and the freckled cheeks. But the eyes looking back at him were different. They had seen things they shouldn't have. They held the weight of a responsibility that would crush a lesser man. He was alone. More alone than he had ever been in his quirkless, friendless life. He had been given the power to be the greatest hero in existence, and his first act was to lie to his mother. His greatest victories would be fought in total silence, in a place no one could reach, for a prize no one would ever know was at stake. He was no longer just Izuku Midoriya, the useless, dreaming Deku. He was the Warden. And his shift had just begun. It would not end until the stars themselves grew cold and died. The 10 months that followed the sludge villain incident were a blur of contradictions. To the outside world, Izuku Midoriya became a ghost. He was present in class, his pen scratching furiously in a new, pristine notebook, but his eyes were distant, unfocused. He stopped his obsessive hero watching, the frantic chasing of every new debut and villain takedown. His mother, Inko, worried herself sick. Her bubbly, emotional son had become quiet, withdrawn, and perpetually tired. He had dark circles under his eyes that no amount of sleep seemed to cure, and he would often stop mid-sentence, wincing as if struck by a sudden, splitting headache. She thought it was trauma from the villain attack. The truth was infinitely more complex. Izuku was living a dual existence, and the strain of it was threatening to tear his young mind apart. His waking hours were spent trying to navigate the mundane world of middle school, but his mind was a battlefield. The hum was his constant companion. The silent, psychic chorus of the Phantom Zone's prisoners was a pressure at the back of his skull, a ceaseless tide of malice, despair, and alien rage. He had to learn to build walls in his own consciousness, metaphorical barriers to keep the whispers from becoming screams, to keep their eternal hatred from bleeding into his own thoughts. His nights were spent in another world entirely. It happened for the first time 3 days after he accepted his role. He was in his bedroom, the walls a shrine to the dream he could no longer have. All Might's smiling face beamed down from a dozen posters, a symbol of a bright, public heroism that was now forever out of Izuku's reach. The hum was particularly loud that night, a specific thread of consciousness, cold, disciplined, and utterly contemptuous, lashing out against its confinement. The psychic feedback made his temples throb. Desperate for a reprieve, he clutched his chest, focusing on the strange, cold point over his heart, the anchor point the Guardian had called his focus. He didn't know what he was doing, only that this mark was the source of it all. He closed his eyes, willing the pain to stop, wishing he could just see what was causing it. The world dissolved. It was not like falling asleep. It was like the universe turning inside out. The familiar sounds of his room, the hum of his computer, the distant city traffic, faded into an absolute void. The feeling of the floor beneath him, the air on his skin, it all melted away. His body was gone. His consciousness was a single, terrified point of light being pulled through an infinite gray static. And then he was there. He stood, or floated, as there was no concept of standing, in the Phantom Zone. It was a place defined by absence. There was no color, only an endless spectrum of gray, from the near white of the crystalline floor to the near black of the non-existent sky. There was no sound, a silence so profound it felt like it was actively absorbing all potential noise. There was no time. Every moment was the same, eternal, unchanging now. Before him, suspended in the gray nothingness, were the prisoners. They were like insects in amber, frozen in ethereal, semi-transparent forms. He saw a leviathan large enough to swallow moons, its silent, spectral form coiled in on itself. He saw a being made of pure, screaming sound, now rendered mute and still, its waveform locked in a silent, jagged pattern. And he saw him. The source of the pressure, in his head. He was humanoid, tall and broad-shouldered, encased in ornate black armor that seemed to drink the non-existent light. A stylized, serpentine S-like symbol was emblazoned on his chest. His face was severe, with a sharp jaw and cold, intelligent eyes that, even in this suspended state, burned with an unquenchable fire. He was not thrashing or raging like the others. He was perfectly still, a monument to disciplined fury, his will a focused lance of pure hatred aimed at the very concept of his imprisonment. This was General Zod. Izuku felt an instinctual terror that was deeper and colder than anything he had ever known. This single being radiated more menace than 1,000 villains. He was a fallen warrior king, and his silent glare promised annihilation. A new presence, separate from the prisoners, brushed against Izuku's mind. It was a chaotic, nightmarish thing, a tumor of physics. It wasn't a creature so much as a screen caught in geometry, a self-devouring fractal of impossibilities that hurt to look at even with his non-eyes. A reality warper. Its mere proximity felt like it was trying to unravel the logic of his thoughts, to turn his memories into paradoxes. The sheer scale of it all crashed down on him. The weight of his duty, the horror of what he was containing. He was a boy. A child. How could he possibly stand guard over gods and monsters? Panic surged, a psychic scream that had no voice. He wanted out. He needed to escape. As if in answer to his desperate need, a new sensation pulled at him. A gentle, insistent tug toward a single point in the infinite gray. It felt like a lighthouse in a storm, a place of safety. He focused on it, and the zone bent around him. The endless expanse of prisoners warped and stretched, and he was drawn through it, arriving in an instant. He was in a self-contained space, a bubble of order within the chaos. A circular chamber, perhaps 100 feet in diameter, carved from the same gray crystal as the rest of the zone. The walls were lined with crystalline shelves that rose into a domed ceiling. But there were no books. Instead, each shelf held countless motes of shimmering, silvery light, each one pulsing gently like a captured star. In the exact center of the room was a single, high-backed chair, a throne of stark, simple design, forged from the very essence of the dimension. This was the Guardian's locus. His sanctum. His only refuge. Hesitantly, Izuku drifted towards one of the shelves. He reached out a phantom hand and let his fingers brush against one of the motes of light. Knowledge, pure and undiluted, poured into his mind. It was a memory, a lifetime, belonging to a previous guardian, a being of silicon and starlight from a galaxy long since dead. He experienced its appointment, its centuries of lonely vigilance, its fight against the creature that fed on concepts. He felt its weariness, its resolve, and most importantly, he learned how it had used the power of the zone. He pulled his hand back, gasping. This place wasn't just a library of facts, it was a library of experiences. Every guardian who had ever held this post had left their knowledge, their techniques, their warnings, here. It was his inheritance. His instruction manual. He spent what felt like an eternity there, though no time passed at all. He drifted from mote to mote, absorbing the basics. The zone was a dimension of potential, and his focus was the key to shaping that potential into reality. His will was the hammer, his imagination the anvil. The power was not his own. He was a conduit, a channel for the zone's sterile, fundamental energy. To wield it, he didn't need to train his body. He needed to forge his mind into a weapon of surgical precision. When he finally willed himself back to his own world, he collapsed onto his bedroom floor, drenched in a cold sweat, his heart pounding. A glance at his clock showed that only 3 minutes had passed. 3 minutes in his world, an age in the timeless locus. That night marked the beginning of his true training. The next 10 months were his crucible. He chose the Goba Municipal Beach Park as his training ground. It was deserted, a man-made mountain of trash and rusting metal, a testament to society's neglect. It was the perfect place for a hero no one would ever see. Every day after school, he would find a secluded spot amidst the heaps of discarded appliances and forgotten furniture, and he would meditate. To any passerby, he would have looked like a strange, sad boy, sitting cross-legged and silent for hours on end. In reality, he was at war. His first task was learning to create phantom constructs. He remembered the knowledge from the Silicon Guardian: visualize, will, solidify. He sat before a rusted, broken microwave, closed his eyes, and focused. He tried to draw power through his focus, picturing a simple, solid cube of gray crystal forming in the air before him. The first attempt resulted in a splitting headache and a faint shimmer in the air that lasted less than a second. The hum of the prisoners intensified, as if mocking his failure. They could feel him drawing on the zone's power, and they hated him for it. He tried again. And again. For a week, all he could manage were momentary distortions. He learned that his concentration had to be absolute. Any stray thought, any flicker of doubt, and the construct would dissolve. He had to build those mental walls higher, stronger, creating a silent space in his mind where he could work, cordoned off from the constant psychic noise. Finally, one evening, as the sun set and painted the polluted water with streaks of orange, he succeeded. A small, wobbly, semi-transparent gray cube, no bigger than his fist, hovered in the air. It hummed with a faint, internal energy, and it was solid. He reached out and touched it. It felt cool and impossibly smooth, like polished obsidian. It held its form for nearly 30 seconds before dissolving into nothing. Izuku wept with relief. It was the first step. Over the next few months, his control grew. The cubes became larger, sharper, more stable. He moved on to more complex shapes, walls, shields, simple weapons like staves and blades. He learned to imbue them with purpose. A shield wasn't just a block of crystal. It was a manifestation of his will to protect, making it far more durable than its physical properties would suggest. He discovered the limitations. The constructs were incredibly strong, but they were extensions of his will. The moment his focus wavered, they vanished. Next came spatial distortion, or as he came to think of it, phasing. This was far more terrifying. The memories of another guardian, a being that existed in 4 spatial dimensions, had shown him the principle. He wasn't truly teleporting. He was briefly shunting his physical body through the phantom zone to a nearby location. It was a step through hell to get next door. His first attempt was with a discarded refrigerator. He stood before it, took a deep breath, and tried to will himself to the other side. He focused on the space behind it, and for a terrifying moment, he felt the familiar, disorienting pull. The world went gray, the hum of the zone screamed in his ears, and then he was back. He had miscalculated. He rematerialized halfway through the refrigerator door. The feeling was indescribable, a horrifying violation of physical law. Cold, solid metal was fused with his torso. He couldn't breathe. Panic, absolute and primal, flooded him. For a split second, he thought he was going to die, a permanent, grotesque monument to his own failure. He instinctively threw his will forward, completing the phase. He stumbled out the other side, collapsing to his knees, vomiting. It took him weeks to build up the courage to try again. He learned that phasing required not just a destination, but a precise, unwavering mental trajectory. It was a calculation of will. He practiced on smaller objects, phasing a pebble through a can, then his hand through a sheet of metal. He started small with himself, phasing a single step forward, then a yard, then across a small clearing. Each phase was a gut-wrenching, disorienting dip into that silent, gray void, a stark reminder of the realm he commanded. His final area of training was sensory perception. This was the most passive of his new abilities, and in some ways, the most unsettling. As his connection to the zone deepened, he began to perceive the world differently. He could feel the fabric of space-time. A high-speed train passing by left a faint, lingering ripple. A powerful quirk being used nearby felt like a sharp spike. He began to see the world not just as objects and people, but as a tapestry of energy and dimensions, and he could spot the occasional loose thread. This sense would be invaluable for detecting threats that bent the rules of reality, like Kurogyri's warp gates. All this training took an immense toll. He was constantly exhausted, living on the edge of mental collapse. The only thing that kept him going was the memory of Kaken's terrified eyes and the knowledge that he was the only thing standing between his world and an eternity of horrors. Finally, the day of the UA entrance exam arrived. He stood before the massive gates of the Hero Academy, a place he had dreamed of his entire life. But the excitement he should have felt was tempered by a cold, heavy sense of purpose. He wasn't here to become the next All Might. He was here to learn, to blend in, to gather the skills he would need to be a better warden while maintaining the fiction of being a normal hero in training. During the orientation, President Mick's booming voice grated against his already frayed nerves. As the hero explained the robot villains, Izuku wasn't just listening. He was expanding his senses, feeling the energy signatures of the robots in the mock city, the latent power of the hundreds of examinees around him. He felt the nervous energy, the ambition, the fear. And next to him, he felt the crackling, explosive impatience of Katsuki Bakugo. When the gates opened, Izuku was already moving. He didn't sprint with the raw power of someone like Ida. He used a series of short, controlled phases, zipping through the crowd in a blur of green and gray. He encountered his first robot, a one-pointer, as it wheeled around a corner. Another student, a girl with purple hair, blasted it with a sound wave from the jacks hanging from her earlobes, and it exploded. Izuku saw his opening. Instead of engaging in a destructive brawl, he approached a second one-pointer from the side. As it swiveled to target him, he phased his right hand directly through its armored chassis. For a moment, his hand was inside the machine's whirring guts. The sensation was bizarre, a phantom feeling of wires and circuits passing through his incorporeal flesh. He focused, and a shard of gray crystal, no bigger than a knife, materialized inside the robot's main processor. He pulled his hand back. The robot sparked violently, its single red eye flickered, and it collapsed in a heap, completely inert. 1 point. No noise, no property damage, minimal energy expenditure. It was efficient. It was the Warden's way. He moved through the city like a ghost. He disabled robot after robot with the same precise, internal sabotage. He wasn't racking up points as fast as Bakugo, whose thunderous explosions echoed through the cityscape, but he was methodical. His true purpose, however, quickly became clear. He saw a boy with a laser quirk get overwhelmed by 3 two-pointers. The robots had him cornered, their cannons charging. Without hesitation, Izuku slammed his palm on the ground. A thick, translucent wall of gray crystal erupted from the asphalt between the boy and the robots. The laser blasts impacted against the phantom construct, scattering harmlessly. The wall hummed, absorbing the energy, before Izuku let it dissipate. "Thanks!" the boy shouted before blasting the off-balance robots to pieces. Izuku just nodded and phased away. Rescue points, he thought, a clinical detachment coloring the thought. He did it again and again. A crystalline ramp sent a charging three-pointer skidding into a wall. A localized phase pulled a girl out from under a collapsing piece of rubble. He became a guardian angel on the battlefield, his interventions swift, silent, and strange. In the observation room, a panel of pro-heroes watched the monitors with varying degrees of interest. "That Bakugo kid is a real powerhouse! A born demolition expert!" President Mike yelled, pointing at a screen showing a massive explosion. "He is effective but reckless," muttered a tired-looking man wrapped in a gray scarf, Eraserhead. His eyes, however, were locked on a different monitor, one following Izuku. "Look at this one!" Midoriya. Nizu, the principal, a small, white-furred creature in a suit, took a sip of his tea, his beady black eyes gleaming with intelligence. "Ah yes! Examinee 7111. His registered quirk is simply Zone. On the screen, Izuku phased through a wall to appear behind a robot, disabling it without a sound. "His power is fascinating," Nizu continued, a small smile playing on his snout. "He isn't destroying them. He's disabling them with surgical precision, and his primary focus seems to be on protecting the other candidates. His villain point count is average, but his rescue point potential is off the charts." All Might, in his skeletal form, watched with a furrowed brow. He remembered the quirkless, crying boy on the rooftop. Where had this power come from? It was nothing like One for All. It was quiet, controlled, and alien. It lacked the vibrant, living energy he associated with quirks. It felt cold. Empty. Then, the ground began to shake. The zero-pointer emerged from behind a skyscraper, its immense form dwarfing the surrounding buildings. It was less a challenge and more a force of nature, an obstacle to be avoided. The other students did just that, turning and fleeing in a tide of panic. Izuku was about to do the same, his job here largely done, when he heard a cry. He turned to see the kind, brown-haired girl who had stopped him from tripping at the gate. She was trapped under a slab of concrete, her leg pinned. The zero-pointer's massive foot was rising, preparing to stomp down right where she lay. The world went silent for Izuku, just as it had with the sludge villain. He saw her wide, terrified eyes. He saw the impending, inescapable doom. And the same, primal instinct took over. Protect. He didn't run. He sprinted towards the danger. He saw Ida and others watch in stunned disbelief. Bakugo, from a rooftop half a mile away, saw the green blur moving against the tide and could only stare, bewildered. Deku? Izuku didn't have the power to destroy the behemoth. A punch would be useless. But he wasn't a brawler. He was a jailer. His power wasn't for destruction, it was for containment. He pushed his connection to the zone further than he ever had before. The hum in his head became a roar. He felt the cold, infinite power welling up inside him, flowing through his focus. He leaped into the air, phasing through a shower of falling debris, and slammed both his hands onto the ground directly in the robot's path. Hold! He roared, the single word a command not to the robot, but to reality itself. The ground erupted. Not with an explosion, but with a silent, crystalline growth. Massive, gray, semi-translucent pillars, thick as ancient trees, burst from the concrete and asphalt. They grew with impossible speed, twisting and branching like thorns from a dark fairy tale. They slammed into the Zero-Pointer's leg, encasing its ankle and knee joints in an unbreakable prison of phantom energy. More pillars shot up, bracing the leg, anchoring it to the ground. The robot's foot, which had been descending, stopped dead with a deafening groan of protesting metal. It strained against the crystalline bonds, its servos whining at maximum capacity, but it could not move. It was frozen, immobilized. Izuku fell to one knee, panting, the world spinning. The massive expenditure of energy left him drained, his head pounding. He had done it. He had contained it. He looked over at the girl. With the immediate threat gone, he rushed to her side, his muscles screaming in protest. He created a series of small, crystalline jacks to lift the heavy slab of concrete, allowing her to pull her leg free. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice strained. I think so," she breathed, looking from her bruised leg to the immobilized giant, and then back to the panting, unassuming boy before her. You saved me," the buzzer sounded, signaling the end of the exam. In the observation room, there was a stunned silence. "My word," Niza whispered, setting his teacup down with a soft click. "He didn't destroy it. He didn't even try. He identified the threat, understood he couldn't overpower it, and chose a different path. Not victory, but nullification. He trapped it." Aizawa's eyes were wide, the tired apathy gone, replaced by a sharp, analytical gleam. That level of control, and the sheer scale of that construct. That is not the power of a first-year student. All Might stared at the screen, a deep, unsettling feeling in his gut. The boy he had dismissed, the boy he had told to be realistic, had just demonstrated a power that was as strategic as it was immense. A power that seemed to come from a place of profound loneliness. 1 week later, a letter from Yue arrived at the Midoriya household. Izuku opened it with trembling hands. A small disc fell out, projecting a hologram of All Might. "I am here as a projection," the hero boomed. He explained the scoring system, Izuku's respectable 45 villain points, and then he smiled. "But that's not the whole story. It was your actions to save another examinee that truly showcased what it means to be a hero." The screen switched to the girl he had saved, Achiko Uraraka, pleading his case to present Mike. "You earned 60 rescue points," All Might declared, "giving you a total of 105. A record-breaking score." His mother was sobbing with joy, hugging him tightly. He had done it. He was in. He was going to UA. Izuku smiled, a genuine, happy smile. But as he looked at All Might's beaming, holographic face, the hum at the edge of his hearing seemed to grow louder. The silent chorus of the damned whispered their endless hatred. He could feel Zod's contempt, the reality warper's madness, the cold hunger of 1,000 other nightmares. He was a UA student now. A hero in training. But his acceptance letter wasn't just a key to his dream school. It was another link in the chain binding him to his silent, eternal, impossible duty. The kingdom of ghosts had a king, and he was about to learn how to walk among mortals. The hallowed halls of UA High School were everything Izuku had ever dreamed they would be, and it was a waking nightmare. The ceilings were impossibly high, the windows vast panes of glass that flooded the corridors with optimistic morning light. Students buzzed with an electric energy, their quirks a kaleidoscope of minor miracles. A girl with butterfly wings chatting by a locker, a boy casually solidifying the air to use as a chair. It was a symphony of potential, a celebration of the superhuman, and for Izuku, it was a distraction he couldn't afford. He walked through the crowded hallway, a ghost at the feast. His new uniform felt stiff and unfamiliar, a costume for a role he was only pretending to play. He offered a weak, tired smile to a student who nodded at him, but his mind was a universe away. Specifically, it was 3.7 million light-years away, in a nascent star system designated XG7. There, in the swirling, primordial dust cloud of a stellar nursery, a prisoner was testing its cage. It wasn't a physical being like Zod. It was a psychic cancer, a creature of pure, malicious thought that called itself the Dream Eater. It didn't punch or claw at the walls of the Phantom Zone, it seeped. It broadcast waves of focused despair, nightmare lances of pure entropy, seeking to poison the developing consciousness of the system's single, life-bearing planet. If it succeeded, it would feed on the resulting planetary extinction event, a feast of terror to sustain it for another millennium. Izuku's job, at that very moment, was to hold the line. In the back of his mind, cordoned off by frantic mental effort, a part of his consciousness was in the zone. He was weaving a psionic shield, a quarantine of will, around the Dream Eater's ethereal form. It was like trying to cup water in his hands, requiring constant, unwavering focus. Every time a student laughed too loudly or bumped into him, his concentration flickered, and he could feel the Dream Eater's influence push against his defenses. The effort manifested as a dull, relentless throb behind his eyes, making the bright, cheerful reality of UA seem hazy and unreal. He found Class 1A and slid the ridiculously large door open. A few heads turned. He recognized the spiky-haired boy with the engine-powered legs from the exam, Tenya Ida. He was already locked in a confrontation with the person Izuku least wanted to see. Katsuki Bakugo was slouched in a chair, his feet propped up on the desk, the very picture of arrogant defiance. "Don't tell me where to put my damn feet, Four Eyes!" he snarled, a low growl in his voice. "You from Semi? So you're a stuck-up elite. I'm gonna have fun crushing you." Ida chopped the air with his hand, rigid and formal. "Crushing your fellow students is hardly befitting of someone aspiring to be a hero." Izuku tried to slip by unnoticed, but it was a fool's hope. Bakugo's crimson eyes snapped to him, and the simmering anger in the room instantly found its focal point. Deku. The name was a curse, laced with a venomous cocktail of fury and confusion. "You're here. How the hell are you here?" The whole class turned to look at him. The pressure in his head spiked. He felt the Dream Eater lash out, a wave of cosmic hopelessness that made his stomach clench. He forced a shaky smile. "Keikaken, good morning." Before Bakugo could erupt, a cheerful voice cut through the tension. "It's you! The plain-looking one!" He turned to see the kind-faced, brown-haired girl from the exam, Achiko Uraraka. Her smile was a beacon of genuine warmth in his cold, divided world. "You were amazing!" she bubbled, her hands clasped together. "That thing you did with the ground! It was incredible! And then you came back for me! Thank you so much!" "Oh, it was nothing," Izuku stammered, his cheeks flushing. The simple, honest praise was so alien to him now. He felt a pang of longing for the simplicity she represented. A world where saving someone was a straightforward, heroic act, not a calculated decision made while simultaneously wrestling with an interdimensional horror. The conversation was mercifully cut short by a new voice from the doorway. "If you're here to make friends, then you can pack up your things and leave." A man who looked like he hadn't slept since the dawn of the Quirk era was lying on the floor in a yellow sleeping bag, sipping on a juice pouch. Shota Aizawa, pro-hero Eraserhead, had arrived. As the class scrambled to their seats, Izuku felt a new sensation. Aizawa's tired, bloodshot eyes scanned the room, and as his gaze passed over Izuku, he felt a strange, targeted pressure against his senses. It was a pinprick of nullity, a focus void. A quirk erasing quirk. It didn't affect his connection to the zone. That wasn't a biological function to be erased. But he could feel its intent. It was like someone trying to unplug a star from the universe. The man's power was fascinating, and terrifying. "It took you 8 seconds to quiet down," Aizawa said, his voice a monotone drone as he unzipped himself from the sleeping bag. "That won't do. Life is not a game." He pulled a blue gym uniform from the bag. Put these on and meet me on the field. The Quirk assessment test was a trial by fire. As Aizawa explained his methodology, that he would gauge their potential and that the student with the lowest score would be expelled, a wave of panic rippled through the class. Izuku felt it too, but it was a distant concern. His more immediate problem was that the Dream Eater was growing more agitated. Holding the shield in place while performing feats of physical and metahuman prowess was going to be like trying to pat his head and rub his stomach while simultaneously composing a symphony. "Bakugo!" Aizawa called out, tossing him a softball. "You finished first in the entrance exam. What was your best throw in middle school?" 67 meters. Bakugo grunted. "Try it with your Quirk." Bakugo grinned, a feral, predatory expression. He wound up, and with a thunderous, concussive blast, launched the ball into the stratosphere. "Die!" he screamed, the word an explosion of pure, cathartic rage. Aizawa held up the device. 705.2 meters. The class erupted in cheers. "This looks so fun!" someone shouted. Aizawa's smile was anything but cheerful. "Fun, you say? So you plan to spend the next 3 years having a nice little party? You think being a hero is a game?" His hair began to float, his eyes glowing a menacing red. "All right. New rule. Whoever comes in last place will be judged to have no potential and will be expelled immediately." The threat was a splash of ice water, sobering the entire class. For Izuku, it simply raised the stakes. He had to perform well enough to stay, demonstrate his abilities without revealing their true nature, and keep a psychic horror from devouring a solar system, all at the same time. No pressure. Test 1, 50-meter dash. He was lined up against Ida. The boy's engines flared to life. The starting pistol fired. Ida shot off like a bullet. Izuku took a breath, and phased. It wasn't a single, continuous teleportation. It was a series of infinitesimally small, rapid-fire jumps. To an observer, it looked as if he was flickering, his body stuttering across the track like a corrupted video file. He wasn't running. He was simply arriving at subsequent points in space, one after another. He crossed the finish line in 4.13 seconds, a fraction of a second after Ida. "Whoa, what was that?" Hirarika asked, her eyes wide. Bakugo, who had cleared his run in 4.22 seconds using controlled explosions, stared at Izuku with narrowed eyes. It wasn't speed. It wasn't strength. It was something else. Something wrong. Test 2, grip strength. Izuku gripped the device. There was nothing he could do here. His powers were not physical. He squeezed with all his might, his arm trembling. 56 kilograms. Pathetic. He heard a few students snicker. A hulking, multi-armed boy named Shoji registered 540 kilograms. Bakugo shot him a look of pure contempt. Still just a weakling, Deku. Test 3, standing long jump. This was easier. He took a running start to sell the illusion of effort, and at the peak of his jump, he phased. He simply willed himself to the other side of the large sandbox, landing softly. He'd cleared it completely. The other students stared, baffled. His power had no visible tell, no flash of light or burst of energy. One moment he was in the air, the next he was on the ground several meters away. Aizawa watched, his expression unreadable, making a note on his data pad. Spatial manipulation. No visible emissions. High degree of control. Inconsistent physical stats. Test 4, repeated sidesteps. This required finesse. Phasing would be too draining. Instead, Izuku focused on the ground beneath his feet. Two small, perfectly smooth, disc-shaped plates of gray crystal materialized under his shoes. They had almost zero friction. With minimal effort, he was able to slide back and forth, gliding across the ground with an eerie, unnatural grace. He looked less like an athlete and more like a dancer on a stage of invisible ice. Test 5, ball throw. This was the one. The moment of truth. Every eye was on him. He could feel Bakugo's gaze like a physical weight, burning into his back. He remembered the first day he met All Might, the ball throw from his own Quirk assessment. He'd poured all of one for all into his fingertip. Now he had a power that was infinitely larger, and infinitely more subtle. Midoriya, you're up. He walked into the circle, the soft ball feeling mundane in his hand. He took a deep breath, pushing the Dream Eater to the very back of his mind, locking it behind a wall of pure will. He needed every ounce of his concentration for this. He mimicked Bakugo's wind-up, a piece of performance art for the crowd. He swung his arm forward, and as the ball left his fingertips, Aizawa's eyes glowed red, his hair floating. "I've erased your quirk," he said, his capture weapon whipping out. "A power like yours is inefficient. You'll injure yourself again and be a liability." Izuku blinked, confused for a second before he realized. Aizawa thought he was the one from the entrance exam videos who had broken all his limbs. The assumption was logical, but wrong. "My quirk doesn't cause backlash, sir," Izuku said calmly, his voice steady. Aizawa's eyes narrowed. "We'll see. You have one more throw." The teacher's quirk deactivated. Izuku took his place in the circle again. The whispers from his classmates grew louder. "He's going to get a normal score. Maybe that first throw was a fluke." Bakugo was practically vibrating. "Come on, Deku," he thought, his fists clenched. "Show me. Show me what the hell you did to get here. Show me the power you've been hiding all this time." Izuku took a breath. He didn't pour power into the ball. He didn't try to throw it with impossible strength. He focused on the space around the ball. He threw it. It traveled a normal arc, maybe 10, 15 feet. And then it vanished. There was no pop, no flash, no sound. One moment, the white sphere was there, spinning against the blue sky. The next, it was gone. The entire class fell silent. Aizawa stared at the spot where the ball had disappeared, his mouth slightly agape. A few seconds passed. Then, his device beeped. He looked down at the screen, and his tired eyes widened almost imperceptibly. He held it up for the class to see. The screen didn't show a number. It showed the mathematical symbol for infinity. Infinity. A collective gasp went through the students. "Infinity?" Kaminari, the electric boy, yelled. "How is that even possible? Did he throw it into orbit?" Zero, the tape dispenser boy, wondered aloud. Izuku offered a simple, half-true explanation. "I opened a small gate to somewhere else." He had, in fact, done just that. For a nanosecond, he had opened a microscopic tear in reality, a wormhole that passed through the non-space of the Phantom Zone and exited 10 miles straight up in the atmosphere, still accelerating. It was the most efficient use of his power he could imagine, not brute force, but a redirection. A cosmic sleight of hand. Bakugo was speechless. His world, which had been turned upside down the day he saw Deku had a quirk, had just been shattered into a million pieces. A punch, an explosion, a laser, those were things he could understand. Things he could fight. Things he could overcome. But this? Vanishing? Infinity? It wasn't a power you could compete against. It felt like a law of physics had been weaponized. It was a power that made his own explosive strength feel like a child's firecracker. The rage that had been his constant companion for a decade was now mixed with a new, terrifying emotion, dread. The useless, pebble in the road Deku wasn't just ahead of him anymore. He was playing a different game entirely. The rest of the tests passed in a blur. Izuku performed adequately, using his powers in subtle ways to conserve his mental energy, which was now dangerously low. The Dream Eater was battering his shield, sensing his distraction. He finished 8th in the overall rankings, safely in the middle of the pack. The boy named Mineta, who came in last, was not expelled. Aizawa admitted it was a logical ruse, to bring out their best performance. At lunch, Izuku sat alone at a corner table, trying to eat his katsudon while reinforcing the crumbling psychic wall in his mind. The cafeteria was a cacophony of noise that made his headache worse. "Midoriya!" He looked up to see Uraraka and Ida approaching with their trays. "Can we sit here?" Uraraka asked, her smile as bright as ever. "As sure," Izuku mumbled, scooting over. "Your performance in the assessment was highly illogical, yet effective," Ida announced, chopping the air as he Saturday. "Your quirk, Zone, is truly multifaceted. How does it function precisely?" "The ability to manipulate spatial coordinates is a rare and powerful gift." Izuku's mind raced for a plausible lie. He had to give them something, a framework they could understand. It's a bit complicated. I can sort of designate an area as my zone, and within that area, I have more control over space. Like making things solid out of nothing, or connecting 2 points. But it takes a lot of concentration. Wow! So cool! Uraraka said, her eyes sparkling. But it looked like you were in pain a few times. Are you okay? Her genuine concern was a sharp, painful jab in his lonely heart. He wanted, more than anything, to tell them. To share the impossible burden. But he couldn't. It wasn't his secret to share, and they wouldn't understand. They would think he was insane. Yeah, I'm fine, he said, forcing another smile. It gives me pretty bad headaches if I overuse it. I have to sort of meditate to recalibrate my focus. That's why I was so out of it this morning. It was the perfect excuse. It explained his fatigue, his distraction, his need for solitude. It was a lie built on a foundation of truth, the most effective kind. That makes sense. Ida nodded sagely. A powerful quirk must have commensurate drawbacks. You must be careful to maintain your mental fortitude. They chatted for the rest of lunch. They talked about their favorite heroes, their motivations for coming to UA, the upcoming classes. It was normal. It was friendly, and Izuku felt like he was watching it from behind a thick pane of glass. Their worries were about grades, training, and making a good impression. His worry was that a psychic entity was about to commit genocide in a star system no one on Earth even knew existed. The gulf between their realities was immeasurable. When the bell rang, signaling the end of lunch, he felt a strange mix of relief and regret. I have to go find a quiet place, he said, standing up. For the headaches. Meditate. Oh, okay. See you in class, Deku. Uraraka waved. The nickname, once a symbol of his uselessness, sounded friendly coming from her. He gave a small wave back and walked away. He didn't go back to class. He found a stairwell that led to the roof. The door was locked, but a lock was a physical object, and physical objects were merely suggestions to him now. He phased his hand through the door, turned the knob on the other side, and stepped out into the biting wind. He was alone. The sounds of the school, of his new friends, faded away below him. Here, there was only the wind and the sky. He sat down, crossing his legs, and closed his eyes. The world of Yui dissolved. The bright, hopeful reality of his dreams school melted away, replaced by the cold, gray infinity of his true calling. The hum of the prisoners rose to a roar, and at the forefront of it all was the Dream Eater, its psychic form a swirling vortex of black and purple despair, hammering against the crystalline shield he had built in his mind. The shield was cracked, fractured, about to fail. Not on my watch. He poured his will into the construct. He wasn't Izuku Midoriya, the tired, anxious high school student anymore. He was the Warden. He gathered the sterile, limitless energy of the zone, channeling it through his focus. The cracks in the psionic shield began to seal, glowing with a soft, gray light. He reinforced the walls, thickened the quarantine, pushed back against the tide of cosmic horror. The Dream Eater shrieked a silent, psychic scream of frustration, lashing out with tendrils of pure fear. Izuku felt flashes of his own deepest insecurities, All Might telling him he couldn't be a hero, Bakugo's sneering face, his mother crying, the cold, crushing loneliness of his new existence. He gritted his teeth, tears streaming from his closed eyes. He accepted the fear. He accepted the loneliness. And he used it, turning it into mortar for his wall. This is my duty, he thought, his will becoming as hard and unforgiving as the zone itself. This is my prison, too. And you will not escape. The entity's assault faltered, its power spent. It retreated, cowed for now, a sullen, malevolent storm receding back into its ethereal cage. The pressure in Izuku's head subsided. The roaring storm in his mind quieted back to the ever-present, hateful hum. He was exhausted, drained to his very soul. He opened his eyes. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the school grounds below. He could see his classmates walking home in small, laughing groups. Uraraka and Ida were together, talking animatedly. He watched them, a solitary figure on the rooftop, the unseen guardian on the wall. He had passed his first day. He had made friends. He had proven his worth, and he had never, in his entire life, felt so completely and utterly alone. He was a student at the top hero academy in the world. The loneliest hero in training. The first few weeks at UA settled into a grueling, unsustainable rhythm. Izuku's life became a masterclass in compartmentalization, a constant, high-wire balancing act between two irreconcilable realities. In one world he was Deku, the quiet, hard-working student with a strange and powerful quirk. He took meticulous notes in modern hero art history, struggled through ectoplasm's math lessons, and did his best to engage with his new friends, Uraraka and Ida. He shared bento boxes at lunch, laughed at their jokes, and offered what advice he could, all while a significant portion of his consciousness was millions of light years away, wrestling with cosmic horrors. His other life was as the Warden. The Phantom Zone was not a static prison. It was a boiling pot of caged malice, and it required constant, active management. The prisoners were always testing the walls, always searching for a weakness. A lesser, brutish creature, a silicon-based behemoth from a high-gravity world, would throw its immense psychic weight against its confines, causing Izuku to suffer from sudden, debilitating waves of vertigo. He'd be in the middle of a conversation with Uraraka, and suddenly the world would tilt on its axis, the floor seeming to drop away from him. He would have to grip a table to steady himself, blaming it on a head rush from his quirk. Another prisoner, a being of pure sound trapped in a silent dimension, would sometimes find a harmonic resonance and attempt to vibrate its way free. For Izuku, this manifested as a high-pitched, agonizing tinnitus that would drown out present mixed lectures, forcing him to clench his jaw and ride out the invisible sonic assault. He was fighting battles no one could see, winning victories that earned him no praise, only a temporary reprieve before the next assault began. He was tired. The exhaustion was more than physical, it was soul-deep. Sleep offered little rest, as his subconscious mind remained on high alert, a silent sentinel in the gray infinity. His grades began to suffer, not from a lack of understanding, but from a simple inability to focus. How could he concentrate on the legal nuances of the Quirk Restriction Act when a colony of sentient, psychic crystals was attempting to broadcast a telepathic signal that would induce homicidal madness in a nearby spacefaring civilization? His friends noticed. Of course, they noticed. "Deku, are you sure you're okay?" Uraraka asked one afternoon as they walked home. Her round face was etched with genuine concern. "You've been zoning out even more than usual. And you look pale. It is imperative that you get adequate rest, Midoriya," Ida added, his hand chopping the air with earnest emphasis. "A hero's performance is directly correlated with their physical and mental well-being. Perhaps you should see Recovery Girl." "I'm fine, really," Izuku lied, forcing a smile that felt brittle and thin. "My quirk is just mentally taxing. I'm still getting used to the workload here at UA on top of it. I just need to meditate more." The lie was a familiar comfort, a shield he used to keep them at arm's length, to protect them from a truth they could never comprehend. But every time he used it, the gulf between him and them widened. He could see the life he could have had, the camaraderie, the shared struggles, the simple joy of being a teenager with a dream, and it was just out of reach, a phantom limb he could feel but never grasp. He was so focused on these overt, brute force attacks from the lesser prisoners that he failed to notice the more subtle, far more dangerous threat. The attacks were not random. They were coordinated. While he was busy reinforcing a section of the zone against the psychic behemoth's tantrum, the sonic prisoner would begin its assault on another wall. While he was silencing the tinnitus, the Dream Eater would make another probe. There were distractions, feints in a much larger strategic game, and he hadn't seen the Grandmaster moving the pieces. The architect of his misery was General Zod. The Kryptonian was unlike the other prisoners. He was not a mindless beast or a creature of abstract chaos. He was a soldier, a brilliant tactician, and his will was a blade of forged steel. While the others raged against their cages, Zod observed. He spent the timeless eons of his imprisonment studying the very fabric of the Phantom Zone, learning its rhythms, its textures, its weaknesses. And when the old guardian faded and this new, young, inexperienced consciousness took its place, he saw his opportunity. He couldn't break the walls himself, not yet. The Warden's power, drawn from the zone itself, was absolute within this dimension. But he could test him. He could stretch him thin. He used the other prisoners as pawns, subtly manipulating them with targeted whispers of psychic suggestion, goading them into attacking, forcing the new Warden to divide his attention, to reveal his limits, his patterns, his breaking points. Zod was mapping his enemy's mind. The first direct contact came during a Heroics 101 class. It was the battle trial, the first time they would be wearing their hero costumes and facing off in a simulated combat scenario. Izuku's costume was simple and practical, a dark green jumpsuit with white accents, a red belt, and a metal respirator that mimicked his idol's iconic smile. He had designed it to be functional, but wearing it felt like a mockery. He was dressed as a hero, but his real work was done in the silence of his mind. He was paired with Uraraka, facing off against the team of Bakugo and Ida. As they stood in the prep room, strategizing, Izuku felt a new kind of pressure building in his skull. It wasn't the blind rage of the behemoth, or the shrieking of the sound creature. This was cold, focused, and intelligent. It felt like a needle, slowly and deliberately being pushed into his brain. It was Zod. The general had found a way to focus his own consciousness, to pierce through the background hum, and target the Warden directly. Deku? Uraraka's voice pulled him from his daze. Are you listening? I was saying I can use my quirk to make myself float, and maybe you could. Deku, you're bleeding. He reached up and touched his nose. His fingers came away wet and red. A nosebleed. The physical manifestation of Zod's focused psychic assault. I'm fine, he stammered, his head swimming. Just a side effect. Your plan is good, Uraraka. Let's do it. The battle began. The moment they entered the building, Bakugo ambushed them. The explosion was deafening, the heat intense. It ripped the side of Izuku's mask off, leaving his ear ringing. He shoved Uraraka out of the way, taking the brunt of the blast on his back. Come on, Deku! Bakugo snarled, his eyes wild with a manic glee. Don't you dare hold back! Show me that stupid, cheating power of yours! As Izuku faced his childhood bully, Zod's mental attack intensified. The needle in his brain began to twist. Black spots danced in his vision. He could feel the general's thoughts, not as words, but as raw, potent concepts: contempt, weakness, failure, child. He was fighting two battles on two separate planes of existence. He dodged another of Bakugo's explosive right hooks, his movements clumsy, his reaction time slowed by the psychic interference. He tried to phase, but his concentration was shattered. He only managed a half-second stutter, not enough to escape the follow-up attack. I'll tell you what's great about you, Kaken! Izuku gasped, his mind a maelstrom of pain and confusion. Your self-confidence, your strength. I admire it. He was trying to channel the heroic spirit of All Might, to win without fighting, but his words were hollow, distracted. Meanwhile, he was shoring up his mental defenses, trying to push Zod's intrusion out of his consciousness. The effort was monumental. Bakugo didn't see an opponent. He saw the same old, useless, mumbling Deku, making excuses. It enraged him. The fight culminated in the explosive clash that tore through the building. Izuku, in a last-ditch effort, created a phantom construct shield to protect himself and Uraraka, but it was a pale, flickering imitation of the constructs he made at the beach. It shattered on impact, and the force of the explosion still threw him against the wall, knocking the wind out of him. He lay on the ground, his body bruised and aching, his head feeling like it was about to split open. Uraraka had managed to secure the weapon, winning them the match, but it felt like a crushing defeat. He had been outmaneuvered by Bakugo, and he had been completely overpowered by Zod. In the infirmary, Recovery Girl healed his physical wounds with a kiss, but she couldn't touch the deeper injury. All Might visited him, offering praise for his strategy and a stern lecture on self-sacrifice. Izuku could barely follow the conversation. The needle in his mind had receded, but the phantom pain remained, a promise of its return. That night, sleep was impossible. The hum of the zone was a raging storm. Zod's initial probe had been a success, and he was now relentlessly pressing his advantage, seeking to break his young warden's will. Izuku knew he couldn't fight this battle in the physical world. He had to face his adversary. He sat cross-legged on his bed, the All Might posters on his wall seeming to mock his weakness. He took a deep, shuddering breath and closed his eyes. He let go of his physical form, ignored the sounds of the dorm, and plunged his consciousness fully into the phantom zone. He bypassed the chaotic expanse of the lesser prisoners and went straight to the Guardian's locus. The cool, silent, gray chamber was his only sanctuary, the only place he felt a semblance of control. The motes of light containing the knowledge of his predecessors pulsed with a steady, calming rhythm. He drifted to the center of the room, to the stark, crystalline throne. He didn't sit in it, it felt too presumptuous, a mantle of authority he hadn't yet earned, but he stood before it, drawing on the locus's inherent stability to fortify his mind. He reached out with his senses, past the walls of his sanctum, and focused on the cold, sharp presence of the Kryptonian general. He opened a channel, not of escape, but of communication, a direct mind-to-mind link. It was a risk, but he had to understand his enemy. The moment the channel opened, Zod's consciousness flooded in. But it wasn't an attack. It was a controlled, disciplined projection of self. Izuku found himself standing on a blasted, alien landscape under a crimson sun. The sky was the color of blood, and the ground was littered with the crystalline ruins of a dead civilization. Before him stood the general, his black armor immaculate, his posture ramrod straight, his phantom eyes burning with an intensity that transcended dimensions. So, the whelp has a sliver of courage after all. The voice was not a sound, but a thought projected with the force of a thunderclap. It was deep, resonant, and filled with a chilling, aristocratic arrogance. "Who are you?" Izuku projected back, his own thought voice a trembling, youthful tenor in comparison. A humorless smile touched Zod's lips. "I am General Drew Zod of the Kryptonian Military Guild. I am the guardian of my people's legacy. And you are my jailer, a child playing with the keys to a kingdom of gods and monsters." "This is a prison," Izuku retorted, trying to inject a confidence he didn't feel. "You are here because you are a danger to others." Zod laughed, a silent, booming sound that echoed across the dead plains of Izuku's mindscape. "Danger? I offered my world salvation. I sought to preserve our race, to pull it back from the brink of extinction. My methods were severe, I will grant you. But they were necessary. And for this, your predecessors judged me and cast me into this gray hell. They mistook a savior for a tyrant." He took a step forward, his presence overwhelming. "Look at you. You are weak. Unsure. You flinch at every shadow. Your mind is a chaotic mess, torn between the trivialities of your infantile world and the crushing weight of a duty you cannot possibly comprehend. You are a shepherd who is terrified of his own flock." "I will not let you escape," Izuku said, his voice faltering. The mental landscape Zod had created was beginning to feel more real than the locus. The crimson sun felt hot on his phantom skin. "Escape?" Zod's expression turned from one of contempt to something more akin to pity. "Child, you still think in such limited terms. Escape is a tactical objective, not a strategy. What would I do? Conquer your pathetic little world? Your mudball of a planet, with its chaotic, self-destructive populace? It would be trivial. But it would be a hollow victory. No, my ambitions are far grander." He gestured to the gray, formless void that surrounded their mental stage. "This dimension. This power you wield. It is a tool of creation, of order. And you use it as a cage. You are a king who uses his throne as a footstool." Every word was a carefully crafted weapon, designed to undermine Izuku's resolve, to plant seeds of doubt. Zod wasn't trying to break down the walls of the prison, he was trying to tear down the walls of the Warden's own mind. "You feel it, don't you?" Zod continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The constant noise. The chaos. The endless, pointless struggle of your so-called heroes against an ever-rising tide of villainy. Your society is a broken engine, sputtering towards its own demise. It lacks purpose. It lacks direction. It lacks a firm hand to guide it. A hero's job is to protect people's freedom," Izuku argued, clinging to the lessons All Might had taught him. "Freedom?" Zod scoffed. "The freedom to be weak? The freedom to be prey? The freedom to descend into anarchy? That is not freedom, it is a gilded cage of chaos. I offer true freedom. The freedom from fear, the freedom from crime, the freedom from want. A world of perfect order, under my protection. Under Kryptonian rule. The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of it was stunning. But Zod's words were laced with a terrifyingly seductive logic. He wasn't just a monster, he was a fallen idealist, a patriot whose love for his people had twisted into a fascistic need for absolute control. And that made him infinitely more dangerous. You're talking about conquest, Izuku said. Slavery. I am talking about peace, Zod corrected, his voice resonating with unshakable conviction. A peace your world has never known. All it would require is for you to turn the key. To let me out. I would do the rest. I would be the villain your world needs, so that you would no longer need heroes. Think of it, child. An end to all suffering. An end to all conflict. Is that not the ultimate heroic act? It was a poisoned dart aimed directly at the core of Izuku's being. His defining, all-consuming desire was to save everyone. Zod was offering him a way to do just that, a terrible, final solution to the problem of human suffering. All he had to do was betray his sacred duty. For a terrifying, fleeting moment, Izuku wavered. He thought of the villains, the nomus, the constant cycle of violence. He thought of his own exhaustion, the crushing loneliness. Zod's offer was a temptation of biblical proportions. The promise of an end to his burden. Then, he looked into Zod's burning, merciless eyes and saw the truth. The general's peace was the peace of the tomb. An order built on a mountain of broken wills. It wasn't salvation, it was subjugation. He remembered Uraraka's bright, determined smile. He remembered Ida's rigid, unwavering sense of justice. He remembered the messy, chaotic, beautiful struggle of humanity. It was a struggle worth protecting. Izuku's thought form solidified. The trembling boy vanished, and in his place stood the Warden. His mental projection was still that of a 14-year-old boy, but his eyes held the weight of his office, the weariness of 1,000 silent battles. Your peace is a prison far worse than this one, Izuku projected, his voice now clear and steady. I will not be your key. He raised his phantom hand, and the mental landscape of Krypton began to dissolve. The crimson sun faded, the crystalline ruins crumbled into gray dust. They were back in the abstract, formless space of their mind link. Zod's expression turned from one of manipulative charisma to cold, hard fury. The mask was off. You are a fool, then. A sentimental child clinging to a flawed and dying world. You have chosen the path of greatest resistance. You have chosen to stand between me and my destiny, the channel between them overloaded with pure, unadulterated psychic force. It was an attack of such magnitude that it felt like a star had gone supernova inside Izuku's skull. Know this, Warden, Zod's voice thundered, a final, chilling promise. I will not whisper to you again. When next we meet, it will not be on a field of thought, but on a field of battle. I will tear down your prison from within, and I will raze your world to the ground. And on its ashes, I will build a new Krypton. The connection shattered. Izuku's consciousness snapped back into his body with the force of a physical blow. He was thrown from his bed, crashing to the floor of his dorm room. He cried out, a raw, guttural scream of agony, clutching his head. It felt as if Zod's psychic fist was still clenched around his brain. His nose was bleeding profusely, staining the front of his pajamas a dark, wet crimson. The room was spinning violently. The hum of the prisoners was a deafening, triumphant roar. He had won the battle of wills, but the cost was immense. He had stood against the Titan and held his ground, but he was just a boy. The strain was more than his mortal mind was meant to bear. He lay on the floor, shaking, sobbing, the coppery taste of blood in his mouth. He had a new understanding of his enemy. Zod wasn't just a prisoner to be contained. He was a rival warden, a competing king. This wasn't just a matter of guarding a cage anymore. This was a declaration of war. And Izuku Midoriya, the lonely hero in training, was the only soldier on the front line. The bus ride to the unforeseen simulation joint was, for Izuku's classmates, a picture of youthful exuberance. Kaminari and Mina Ashido were laughing loudly, Kirishima was passionately declaring Bakugo's explosive personality. Manly. And Tsuyu Azuri was bluntly, and accurately, assessing the explosive boy's perpetually enraged state. Izuku sat between Uraraka and Ida, a small, forced smile plastered on his face, feeling as though he were an astronaut observing a foreign planet through a thick helmet. He was only half present. The other half of his mind was consumed by the ceaseless, grueling war he was waging in the Phantom Zone. In the weeks since his mental confrontation with Zod, the nature of the attacks had changed. They were no longer sporadic probes. They were a relentless, coordinated siege. The general was using the other prisoners like a living battering ram, hurling their psychic rage against the zone's conceptual walls in a constant, 24-hour-a-day assault. Izuku's mental defenses were strained to their absolute limit. He was a living dike, plugging a dozen leaks at once. His will the only thing holding back a flood of cosmic horror. The effort was a constant, agonizing drain. He hadn't had a full night's sleep in days. Food tasted like ash. The vibrant colors of his world seemed muted, as if seen through a gray filter. His headaches were a permanent fixture, a throbbing crown of thorns he could never remove. Your Quirk is a lot like All Might's. Kirishima's voice cut through his mental fog. The cheerful, sharp-toothed boy was trying to engage him in the class-wide conversation. Izuku blinked, struggling to catch up. Huh? Oh no, not at all. Mine's different. He knew Kirishima was referring to the raw power he'd shown in the ball throw, but the comparison felt like sacrilege. All Might's power was a bright, warm, living flame. His was a cold, sterile, and terrifyingly vast emptiness. But All Might doesn't hurt himself when he uses his power, Kirishima pointed out, his brow furrowed in thought. That's what makes him so cool. The conversation moved on, but Izuku's mind snagged on the concept of damage. He was hurting himself, he realized. Not his body, not his bones, but his mind. His soul. Every moment he spent as the Warden, he felt a little more of Izuku Midoriya, the cheerful, optimistic boy, being eroded away, replaced by the cold, weary, pragmatic Guardian. As the bus pulled up to the massive domed facility of the USJ, Izuku felt a new and entirely unwelcome sensation. It was a faint, sickly tremor in the fabric of spacetime itself. It felt like a badly healed wound, a place where reality was thin and scarred. He had felt it before, in miniature, whenever Aizawa used his quirk, a focused pinprick of nullity. This was different. This was a messy, uncontrolled tearing. Hello, everyone. I've been waiting for you. The space hero, 13, stood at the entrance, their bulky white costume a friendly, welcoming sight. But as the hero began their speech about quirks and their potential for destruction, Izuku's unease grew. The spatial tremor was coming from inside the USJ. He subtly expanded his unique senses, trying to pinpoint the source. It felt greasy, unnatural, like a child trying to perform surgery with a rusty spoon. All right, now that's over, Aizawa began, but he was cut off. The lights in the dome flickered and died, plunging the facility into an eerie twilight. The central fountain sputtered and went still. And in the plaza below, the air began to tear. It wasn't a clean cut. It was a violent, swirling vortex of bruised purple and sickly black smoke, a cancerous growth on the skin of the world. From this swirling wound, people began to emerge. Dozens of them. Low-level thugs, street villains, a motley collection of society's dregs. Izuku's blood ran cold. His every instinct screamed. This was it. The source of the tremor. A warped quirk. A crude, brutal, and chaotic form of the very spatial manipulation he commanded. Stay together and don't move, Aizawa ordered, his goggles snapping down over his eyes. 13, protect the students. What the heck? Are these part of the training? Kirishima asked, his voice a mixture of confusion and excitement. This is no training exercise, Aizawa said, his tone grim as he launched himself down the stairs. These are real villains. As Aizawa engaged the mob below, a whirlwind of combat that showcased his terrifying efficiency, Izuku's world fractured. The moment Kurojire's warp gate opened, Zod acted. The general wasn't just a brilliant tactician, he was an opportunist of the highest order. He had been waiting for a moment of weakness, a distraction. The sudden, violent tearing of spacetime from the outside was the perfect catalyst. It was like an earthquake shaking the foundations of a prison, and Zod was ready to exploit every crack. He focused the chaotic, destructive psychic energy of the silicon behemoth, and the reality-warping madness of the fractal creature, turning them into a metaphysical sledgehammer. He slammed this combined force against the weakest point of the zone's wall, a point that Izuku, distracted by the sudden villain invasion, had left momentarily under-reinforced. The impact was a psychic explosion in Izuku's mind. He cried out, stumbling back, clutching his head as a pain more intense than anything he had ever felt tore through him. It was a white-hot agony that eclipsed thought. The world dissolved into a smear of meaningless color and sound. He could feel the conceptual wall of the zone groaning, cracking, threatening to shatter under the focused assault. Midoriya! Ida shouted, grabbing his arm to steady him. A headache, bad one! Izuku gasped, his vision swimming. At that moment, the swirling black and purple mist that was Kurogyri manifested directly in front of the students. Greetings! The villain's disembodied yellow eyes gleamed. We are the League of Villains, and we are here to kill All Might. Before anyone could react, the mist expanded, engulfing them. Izuku felt a horrifying, nauseating lurch as his body was forcibly pulled through a chaotic, unstable wormhole. It was a brutal, jarring mockery of his own controlled phasing. He was separated from Uraraka and Ida, the world spinning around him in a nauseating vortex. He landed with a splash in cold, murky water. He surfaced, gasping, in the USJ's shipwreck zone. Mineta, the small, purple-bald boy, surfaced beside him, screaming in terror. A few feet away, Tsuyu Ajiri broke the surface, her frog-like composure unshaken. Looks like we're in a bit of a bind, Karo, she said, her long tongue flicking out, but Izuku barely heard her. He was fighting a war on two fronts, and he was losing on both. Villains with aquatic quirks were beginning to circle them in the water, their grinning faces like sharks sensing blood. And in his mind, the siege was reaching its crescendo. He could feel Zod's triumphant, contemptuous will pressing down, feel the cracks spreading across the zone's wall. If it broke, the consequences were unthinkable. A being like the reality warper being unleashed on Earth? It would be the end of everything. I can't let that happen. He had to make a choice. A terrible, impossible choice. He could focus all his energy on the villains in front of him, using his powers to their fullest to ensure his and his friends' survival. Or he could divert his power to the zone, to reinforce the wall, leaving himself weakened and vulnerable in the physical world. There was no choice at all. His duty was clear. Hold the line, Warden. The final words of his predecessor echoed in his soul. Okay, he said, his voice a low, strained whisper. He looked at Tsuyu and Mineta, his eyes dark with a resolve they couldn't understand. Listen to me. We need a plan. While they quickly formulated a strategy, Izuku partitioned his mind. He pushed the immediate, physical world into a small corner of his awareness. The majority of his will, his focus, his very being, plunged into the gray infinity. He became a psychic combat engineer, frantically shoring up the damaged wall. He pulled raw potential from the zone, weaving it into conceptual girders and metaphysical struts. He could feel Zod's forces hammering against his repairs, every blow a fresh wave of agony. The process left him physically weak, his connection to the zone's power in the real world reduced to a trickle. His constructs would be weaker, his phasing unreliable. He was choosing to fight a Navy battleship with a rowboat, in order to keep a Kraken from waking. You're the key, Mineta, Izuku said, his face pale and slick with water and sweat. Your sticky balls. Can you throw them far? Of course I can. They're my whole deal, the small boy wailed, even as he began to pluck the purple spheres from his head. The villains closed in. Izuku took a deep breath. Tsuyu, get ready to grab us. Mineta. Now! Mineta unleashed a barrage of his purple balls, which stuck to the villains in the water, clumping them together. Izuku, with a grunt of immense effort, slammed his hands together on the water's surface. A construct formed. It wasn't the elegant, powerful wall from the entrance exam. It was a crude, flickering, disc-shaped shockwave of gray energy that shot outwards. It was weak, barely solid, but it was enough. It slammed into the clumped-together villains, sending them careening back into the center of the shipwreck zone. At the same time, Izuku screamed in his mind as the reality warper slammed a psychic tendril into a newly formed crack in the zone's wall. The feedback was a flash of pure white pain. His construct flickered and died. "Now, Tsuyu!" he choked out. Tsuyu's long tongue shot out, wrapping around his and Minetta's waists. With a powerful kick, she launched them out of the water and towards the ship in the center of the zone. They landed hard on the deck. "That was a good plan, Midoriya," Tsuyu said, ever calm. "But you don't look so good." He was on his hands and knees, panting, his vision blurry. "Just tired," he managed to say. The dual exertion was tearing him apart. He could feel his mental shield against Zod beginning to crumble. The general's cold, triumphant thoughts were starting to bleed through. "You are failing, child. Your world will burn, and you are too weak to stop it." Suddenly, a massive vortex of water erupted in the center of the zone, pulling the ship and the remaining villains towards it. It was one of the villains, using their quirk to try and sink them. "We need to get off the ship!" Izuku yelled, forcing himself to his feet. He looked at his two classmates. He had to save them. That was the immediate, tangible goal. He could hold the zone for a few more minutes. He had to. He looked at the water, then at Minetta's head. An idea, desperate and insane, sparked in his mind. "Minetta! Throw all of your balls into the water! Now!" While Minetta created a floating minefield of sticky purple spheres, Izuku gathered the last dregs of his accessible power. He held his hand out, palm facing the water, and focused. His nose started bleeding again, a warm trickle down his lips. A small, gray, crystalline needle, no bigger than his finger, materialized in his palm. It shimmered, vibrating with contained energy. He had never tried anything like this before. It wasn't a stable construct. It was a focused, unstable burst of spatial distortion. He flicked his wrist, sending the needle flying into the center of the water vortex. The moment the needle hit the water, it discharged. For a split second, a pinprick of the phantom zone's absolute reality opened and closed. It was a microscopic portal, a gate to nowhere, that existed for less than a nanosecond. But its effect on the physical world was catastrophic. It was like pulling the plug on a bathtub the size of a lake. The water vortex collapsed in on itself with a deafening implosion. The massive volume of water, drawn towards the momentary spatial anomaly, created a titanic wave that exploded outwards, swamping the villains and slamming the ship violently against the edge of the basin. The three students were thrown across the deck, but they were safe. They were out of the water. Izuku collapsed, his consciousness flickering. The effort had cost him nearly everything. The psychic walls in his mind were gone. Zod's presence was no longer a pressure, it was an occupation. Meanwhile, at the Central Plaza, the situation was dire. Aizawa, despite his incredible skill, was being worn down. He was fighting dozens of villains at once, the constant need to erase quirks taxing him to his limit. And then, he faced the leader. The man-child with hands covering his body, Tamura Shigaraki, and the hulking, monstrous creature at his side, the Noma. When Izuku, Tsuyu, and Minetta finally made their way to the edge of the plaza, hiding behind some rubble, the sight that greeted them was horrifying. Aizawa was pinned under the Noma, his arm twisted at a sickening angle, his face being ground into the concrete. The monster was an abomination, its exposed brain and dead, staring eyes a mockery of life. Izuku looked at the Noma, and his guardian senses screamed. He had felt things like this before, in the deepest, most secure pits of the Phantom Zone. The Noma wasn't just a creature of flesh and blood. Its soul, or what passed for one, was a gaping void. It was a patchwork horror, a dozen stolen lives and powers stitched together into a single, mindless puppet. It radiated an aura of pure anti-life, a wrongness that resonated with the sterile emptiness of the zone itself. It was a monster that belonged in his prison. Shigaraki cackled, his voice a dry, scratchy rasp. "You're so cool, Eraserhead. So cool. But you can't beat my Noma. He was specifically designed to kill All Might." At that moment, the doors to the USJ were blown off their hinges. All Might had arrived. He was not smiling. The battle that followed was titanic. All Might, the symbol of peace, against the Noma, a creature built to absorb his power. The exchange of blows shook the very foundations of the building, but All Might was at his limit. Izuku could see it. The hero was faltering. The gnome's shock absorption was too perfect. The monster had All Might in a brutal bear hug, its claws digging into his side, trying to pierce his organs. Kurogiri was opening a warp gate to cut the hero in half. Bakugo, Kirishima, and Todoroki had jumped in to help, but they were outmatched. All Might was going to die. Aizawa was going to die. His friends were going to die. And in his head, Zod's voice whispered, a cold, seductive poison. Let them. They are insignificant. Their deaths are meaningless in the grand scheme. Conserve your strength. The true battle is here, with me. Let your world burn. It will be a mercy. For a single, horrifying second, Izuku considered it. The sheer, overwhelming exhaustion, the pain, the hopelessness, it was all too much. He could just let go. Let the physical world fade away and focus on his true, impossible duty. Then he saw All Might's face. The hero was bleeding, battered, but he was still fighting. He was still trying to save everyone. He was still smiling, even if it was a pained, bloody grimace. And Izuku Midoriya's spirit, the spirit of a true hero that the first guardian had seen, roared back to life. No. He pushed Zod's influence back with a final, desperate surge of will. He ignored the screaming pain in his skull. He ignored his screaming muscles. He staggered out from behind the rubble. What are you doing, Deku? Bakugo screamed as he was blasted away from Kurogiri. Izuku didn't have the strength for a complex construct. He didn't have the focus for a precision phase. All he had left was one, single, desperate act of defiance. He had to buy All Might a single second. He thrust both his hands forward, toward Shigaraki, who was reaching for Tsu's face. He didn't try to build a wall from the ground up. He pulled it directly from the zone, a slab of shimmering, gray, crystalline reality, 10 feet tall and 20 feet wide, materialized from thin air. It didn't grow, it simply appeared, fully formed, between the villains and the students. It was translucent, and through it, they could see distorted, ghostly images of the prisoners trapped within the zone, a flash of Zod's armor, the coil of the space Leviathan, the impossible angles of the reality warper. It was a window into hell. The wall hummed with a bone-chilling, silent energy. It was a physical manifestation of the concept of imprisonment. Shigaraki recoiled, his hand stopping inches from the wall's surface. What is this? He hissed, a flicker of fear in his eyes. The raw, alien wrongness of the wall was something his mind couldn't process. The Nomu, mindless and obedient, threw a punch at the wall. Its fist, which could rival All Might's, struck the gray surface. There was no impact. No sound. The creature's fist simply stopped. Its kinetic energy was siphoned away, absorbed into the infinite, sterile void of the zone. The monster pulled its hand back, confused, its simple brain unable to comprehend a barrier it could not smash. The act of manifesting the wall had drained the last of Izuku's reserves. He fell to his knees, his vision going black. The last thing he heard was All Might's voice, filled with a new, roaring power. Thank you, young Midoriya! You gave me the opening I needed! The hero broke free from the Noma's grasp. Go beyond! He roared. Plus Ultra! A flurry of blows, too fast for the eye to see, each one stronger than the last, overwhelmed the Noma's shock absorption. The final punch sent the monster careening out of the USJ, a black speck disappearing into the sky. Izuku collapsed onto the cold ground, his consciousness finally giving way. The wall of phantom energy flickered, dissolved, and vanished. The dual invasions, of the USJ and of his mind, were over. For now, he had held the line. He had protected his friends. He had saved the symbol of peace. And it had cost him everything. He lay broken and bleeding, a silent, solitary soldier falling on a battlefield no one else could see.